Tim Cook just called it a 100-year flood. In over 40 years at Apple, he says he has never seen anything like this. And just days ago, Apple did something it has never ever done before. It went to the White House and asked for permission to buy memory chips from a Chinese company that the Pentagon has flagged as having ties to the People's Liberation Army of China. So, what is going on with memory? Why have DRAM prices nearly doubled in a single quarter? Why is your next laptop and even our next PlayStations and Xboxes about to cost much more? And is the panic about a Chinese company destroying American chipmaker Micron actually justified, or is it completely overblown? Let's get into it. Let's start with the raw numbers, because they are genuinely staggering. In the first quarter of 2026, DRAM prices, that's the working memory in our phones, laptops and servers, surged about 100% compared to the previous quarter. Not over a year, in a single quarter, and analysts expect another 50 to 60% jump in the current quarter on top of that. Counterpoint research says that memory prices have roughly quadrupled over the past 3 quarters. Now, here is the key thing to understand. This is not your typical memory shortage. Back in 2021, during COVID, we had a memory shortage too, but that was a supply side problem. Factories shut, logistics broke, and the supply chain basically seized up. Once factories reopened, prices normalized. This time, however, it's completely different, because this is a demand-driven shortage, and demand-driven shortages are far harder to fix, because the source of the demand just keeps growing. Of course, what is this source? Well, it's artificial intelligence. Here is the mechanism, and it's actually elegant once you see it. The 3 companies that dominate the world's memory production are Samsung, SK Hynix and Micron. Between them, they make just about every single DRAM on Earth. Now, AI data centers, the ones that run the NVIDIA GPUs, AMDs and ASICs, they don't use regular memory. They need something called HBM, high bandwidth memory. I've got a video on that. It's a special premium type of DRAM where the chips are stacked vertically. Every single NVIDIA B300 GPU needs 8 HBM chips, each with 12 DRAM dice inside. And here is the catch. Making HBM uses the same factory wafers as regular memory, the building blocks basically, and producing 1 bit of HBM takes roughly 3 times the wafer capacity of regular DDR5 that we have in our laptops, for example. And so, when Samsung, SK Hynix and Micron realized that they could earn massive margins selling HBM to the AI boom, they did the rational thing, the thing that everybody would do. They shifted their factories towards it. As of early 2026, these 3 have collectively shifted about 93% of their combined production towards HBM and AI memory. That tiny silver left over, that is what is supposed to supply every single smartphone, laptop, PC, and every single games console on the planet. It is a zero-sum game. As one analyst put it, every wafer that goes into an HBM stack for an NVIDIA GPU, for example, is a wafer that is denied to the memory in our phones. And it gets much worse, sadly. The industry actually underinvested during the 2022-23 downturn. Samsung cut production in about half, and nobody built new capacity basically. So when AI demand actually exploded, there was no slack in the system. And so we do have new factories coming. Micron is building in Singapore, and we've got SK Hynix that are building currently in Korea. But they will not reach volume production until at least 2027. And we also have the Intel CEO putting it quite bluntly. There is no relief until 2028, which brings us to Apple. And the story that broke just last week. Apple, like everybody else, buys its memory from Samsung, SK Hynix or Micron. And it's getting squeezed pretty hard. The company recently raised prices across its whole lineup, MacBooks, iPads, and so on, by about 20%. The 1TB M5 MacBook Pro costing $300 more than a week earlier. just a week earlier, imagine that. Even gaming consoles are affected, with prices rising about $100 to $150 from August. Interestingly, the iPhone was mostly spared, because it does use less memory, but the MacBook definitely did take the hit. Tim Cook explicitly blamed memory. It was right after the day of the Micron earnings call that Tim Cook said there is less supply at a time when consumers want devices, and the memory guys are passing along huge price increases. Let's be honest about it. Apple is upset that they cannot keep all the margins themselves. But basically, Apple went looking for a way out, and it found one. A Chinese company called CXMT. Listen, Shaanxin Memory Technologies, possibly. So this is China's largest DRAM maker. It is heavily backed by the Chinese Communist Party, so its government, and it crucially, it has kept making traditional DRAM while the big three chased the AI margins of the HBM memory. It is one of the few suppliers, basically, that is left with potentially some spare capacity, and it does already supply Western brands such as Corsair, Dell, and HP. But there is one enormous problem, a massive problem actually. CXMT, the Chinese company, sits on a very special list. It sits on the Pentagon's 1260H list, which doesn't sound like anything, but this is the US Department of Defense list of companies that it believes have ties to the Chinese military, the People's Liberation Army. In fact, the Pentagon had removed CXMT from that list a few months ago, but it also restored it in the latest version. Now, and this is subtle but quite important, being on that list, it doesn't legally ban Apple from buying CXMT, Chinese chips I'll call them. What it does create is a serious reputational and political risk. The US Defense Department cannot contract with companies on the list or use products from third parties, i.e. Apple, that rely on them. So, as a company as visible as Apple, doing business with a PLA-flagged supplier is actually radioactive. And that's why Apple did something unprecedented. According to the Financial Times and Bloomberg, Apple has been lobbying the Commerce Department. They've been begging, basically. And they have escalated all the way up to the White House, asking the Trump administration to essentially guarantee that CXMT won't be added to the stricter entity list. And also to bless the purchase from the Chinese company. But the kicker is that the Chinese company reportedly already has been approved for, internally in the US government, has been approved for addition to that entity list. It just hasn't been formally published yet. And if it is added to that entity list, then Apple would need a government license that is typically denied. And that is really the clock that Apple is racing against. This is the first confirmed case, actually, that we've seen of a major US company, a tech company, formally petitioning, begging the government for permission to buy from a Pentagon-designated Chinese military-linked supplier. Congress, obviously, is expected to object. But here is where the investment angle comes in, and where I think that the narrative gets distorted. The fear circulating the market goes like this. If the USA opens the door to the Chinese company, CXMT, and Chinese memory starts flooding into the Western supply chains, then American champion Micron and the Koreans, Samsung and SK Hynix, get undercut and crushed. The whole memory boom that sent Micron stock up over 200% just this year could unravel. And it sounds so scary. But let's actually look at the facts, because I think that the fear is massively overblown. Here's why. The first one is the technology gap. Yes, Chinese DRAM is a bit cheaper. It's not dramatically cheaper though. CXMT's chips are also technologically behind the US. So export restrictions have deliberately limited the chip-making equipment that CXMT can access, the machines from ASML and so on. So its manufacturing trails the leading edge. That is fine for an iPad or iMac or a Mac or an iPhone. It's fine, really, but it is useless for the cutting-edge HBM that goes into AI accelerators, which is exactly where all the money is right now, the profit. And CXMT cannot compete in a high-margin AI memory market at all. The second point I've got for this is that CXMT is also supply constrained, because this isn't a company sitting on infinite cheap chips ready to drown the world. It is one manufacturer with limited capacity. Even if Apple gets its license, CXMT can supply a slice of Apple's commodity it needs, but it cannot replace the entire Western memory industry. The idea that it single-handedly collapses Micron's pricing doesn't survive contact with actual production numbers. And the third point that I have is, and it's a big one, Micron's growth isn't about consumer DRAM at all. In fact, they stopped making it earlier this year. Its high bandwidth memory and cloud-related revenue grew from 17% of its DRAM business in 2023 to nearly 50% in 2025. So, if CXMT takes some of the low-margin commodity iPad-style memory business, honestly, that might be something Micron is very happy to let go anyway, because it frees up Micron's wafers that are used for making the chips for the high-margin AI memory that it actually wants to make. The fourth point is that politics are cut against CXMT. This is a Pentagon blacklisted PLA-linked company that has already been internally approved for the entity list. The political pressure in Washington is to restrict CXMT, not unleash it. The idea that the floodgates are about to open, frankly, is the opposite of any likely outcome. CXMT is growing explosively. We have to be objective about that. Massively. In Q1 2026, revenue reportedly jumped over 700% year on year. That's a lot. It swung from a loss to a massive profit, a sizable profit. China is pouring resources into closing the gap with the West and the Koreans. So the long-term competitive threat is real. But in the short term, it is not imminent. It is not Micron killing catastrophe that some of the headlines currently imply. Now let me bring this together a bit, because it has been quite long. The memory shortage, as most of us know, is real, and it will not go away until 2027 or 2028. It could even go to 2030, according to some analysts. AI has fundamentally rewired where the world's silicon goes. For consumers, it does mean more expensive laptops, smaller default RAM, and slower upgrade cycles for the next couple of years. And also, hard drives, parts like that are also going to be going up in price. And that part is obviously not very pleasant. For the memory makers, Samsung, SK Hynix and Micron, it is one of the best environments, as you can imagine, in the industry's history. Every record bill of materials quarter for Apple is a record revenue quarter for the Microns of the world. And the Apple CXMT story, I found it very fascinating, and it is genuinely a geopolitical flashpoint, and it tells us how desperate the squeeze has become when Apple is actually willing to walk into Washington and beg to buy PLA-flagged supplier memory. But as an actual near-term threat, I do want that there is no threat to Micron or SK Hynix Samsung businesses. I think that it is a scary story that the fundamentals do not support, not yet at least. It is a different technology tier, it is constrained supply, wrong market segment even, and the political headwinds all point the same way. The real risk to memory stocks was never China. It is the cycle. It has been a cyclical business always. It has been boom and bust. And the only thing that ends this boom is a new capacity coming online in 2027 and 2028, of course. And the inevitable moment that supply finally catches demand. That will be the end of it. That's the thing to watch for. It is not the Chinese CXMT company. So, is the memory crisis real? Absolutely. Is your next device going to cost more? Probably is. Is Apple genuinely cornered enough to lobby the White House over a blacklisted Chinese chip maker? Apparently so. But is China about to destroy Micron? Definitely not. If you found this useful, please let me know in the comments whether you think Washington should grant Apple that license. It is a genuinely hard question. Cheaper devices for consumers versus a Pentagon national security flag. I'd love to hear where you land.